The wind screamed across the empty plains beneath a sky covered in black clouds. A lone rider crossed the frozen road on a massive black horse, his long gray coat moving violently in the cold night air. At his side rested an old revolver and a sword marked by countless battles. Nobody knew his real name anymore. In villages hidden between mountains and forests, people whispered stories about him after midnight. Some believed he was cursed. Others said death itself walked beside him. But everyone called him the same thing: the Lone Rider. Years ago, he fought in a terrible war that burned cities and destroyed entire families. When the fighting finally ended, he returned home hoping to find peace waiting for him. Instead, he found ashes. His village had been destroyed. His wife and daughter had disappeared without a trace. Since that day, he wandered endlessly across forgotten roads searching for answers no one could give him. That night, after riding for hours through freezing rain, he arrived at a small village hidden between dead forests and steep hills. The moment he crossed beneath the wooden gate, his horse slowed nervously. Something felt wrong. No lights burned inside the houses. No voices echoed through the streets. Even the wind seemed afraid. The rider stopped beside an ancient stone while standing in the middle of the village square. His horse refused to move farther. Then a wooden door slowly opened nearby. An old woman stepped outside, holding a weak candle with trembling hands. Fear filled her pale face the moment she saw him. "You must leave," she whispered quickly. "Before midnight." The lone rider looked at her calmly. "Why?" The old woman turned toward the dark forest surrounding the village. "Because of the Faceless rider." A cold wind swept through the empty streets. "He comes every night hidden inside the fog, riding a white horse. He knocks on doors and calls people using the voices of their dead loved ones." The lone rider narrowed his eyes. "And if someone answers?" The woman's hands began shaking harder. "They disappear before morning." A horrifying scream suddenly echoed from deep inside the forest. The candle almost slipped from her hands. "He's here." At once, thick fog began crawling between the houses like living smoke. Horses trapped inside nearby stables screamed and kicked against wooden walls. Doors slammed shut across the village. Then the rider appeared. Far away near the forest stood a tall figure mounted upon a ghostly white horse. Black clothing covered his body completely, and a dark hood hid his face. But beneath the hood, two glowing red eyes stared directly at the lone rider. The village fell silent. The mysterious figure slowly raised one arm and pointed toward the forest behind him. An invitation, or a challenge. For the first time in years, the lone rider felt real fear crawling through his chest. But beneath that fear, another feeling awakened. Hope. Deep inside, he believed this creature somehow knew what happened to his missing family. Without another word, he climbed back onto his horse. Behind him, the old woman screamed desperately, "If you follow him, you'll never return." The lone rider looked toward the dark forest. "I stopped returning long ago." Then he rode directly into the fog after the Faceless rider. Within seconds, both vanished beneath the dead trees. The deeper the lone rider traveled into the forest, the colder the world became. The fog swallowed everything behind him until even the village disappeared completely. Only the sound of his horse breathing and the distant hooves of the Faceless rider guided him through the darkness. Dead trees twisted toward the sky like giant claws. Strange whispers moved between them. At first, the lone rider could not understand the voices. Then he heard her. "Father." His heart nearly stopped. The voice belonged to his daughter. He pulled the reins sharply and looked around, but saw nothing except endless fog drifting between the trees. Again the voice came. "Help me." The black horse became nervous, refusing to move forward. The lone rider slowly reached for his revolver. "Show yourself." Silence answered him. Then shadows began moving between the trees. Dozens of human shapes slowly appeared inside the fog. Men, women, children. Their pale faces stared at him with empty black eyes. The missing villagers. Their mouths opened together. "He is waiting." Suddenly the shadows rushed toward him. The lone rider fired instantly. The sound exploded through the forest as one shadow vanished into smoke. He drew his sword and forced his horse forward while the creatures screamed around him. Ahead, the Faceless rider waited motionless beneath the dead trees. Watching, the lone rider charged directly toward him. But the moment he reached the figure, the white horse disappeared into fog. Only laughter remained. Cold. inhuman. And somewhere deeper in the forest, a church bell began to ring. The bell echoed endlessly through the darkness. The lone rider followed the sound until the forest suddenly opened before him. Hidden among the dead trees stood an ancient church covered in black vines. Its broken tower leaned dangerously beneath the stormy sky. Candles burned behind cracked windows. Someone was inside. The lone rider climbed down from his horse and slowly pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The smell of dust and decay filled the air. Inside the church sat dozens of villagers kneeling silently before the altar. Their heads remained lowered. None of them moved. At the end of the room stood the faceless rider. For the first time, the lone rider saw his face, or what remained of it. His skin looked burned and broken like rotting flesh stretched across bone. Empty darkness filled the place where his eyes should have been. "You've been searching for them a long time," the creature whispered. The lone rider raised his revolver. "What are you?" The creature smiled slowly. "Your punishment." Suddenly, every villager lifted their heads at once. Their eyes were completely black. The church doors slammed shut behind him. Then the dead began to rise. The villagers moved unnaturally toward him, their bodies twisting like puppets controlled by invisible strings. The lone rider fired again and again, but more bodies kept coming from the darkness. Then he saw them, standing near the altar. His wife, his daughter, pale, silent, motionless. "Come with us," his wife whispered softly. The rider froze. For one terrible moment, he almost believed they were real. The lone rider slowly lowered his weapon as tears filled his eyes for the first time in years. His daughter stepped closer through the darkness. "Father," but something felt wrong. Her smile never moved. Her eyes were empty. The rider suddenly remembered the old woman's warning. He raised the revolver again. "You are not my family." At once, the illusion shattered. The church walls cracked violently as shadows poured from the ceiling like black smoke. The false images of his wife and daughter twisted into horrifying creatures with razor-like teeth and hollow faces. The faceless rider laughed. "They died because of you." The words struck harder than any blade. Suddenly memories returned. The war, the fire, the soldiers. The lone rider remembered leaving his village to join the fighting despite his wife begging him to stay. Days later, enemy soldiers attacked the village searching for rebels. His family never escaped. The guilt he buried for years now stood before him like a living nightmare. "You created this place," the creature whispered. "Your grief fed it." The church began collapsing around them. The dead villagers screamed as shadows consumed their bodies one by one. The lone rider mounted his horse and charged toward the altar where the faceless rider waited. Steel crashed against darkness. The ancient sword cut through the creature's chest, releasing an explosion of black smoke that shook the entire church. The faceless rider screamed with inhuman fury as the building collapsed into flames around them. Fire consumed the cursed church while the forest trembled beneath violent winds. The lone rider burst through the collapsing doors on his horse as burning wood crashed behind him. But the faceless rider still lived. The creature emerged from the flames like a shadow refusing to die. Its body changed constantly between smoke and flesh while its horrible voice echoed through the trees. "You can never escape your guilt." The lone rider stopped at the edge of the forest and slowly climbed down from his horse. For years he had run from his pain, from his memories, from the truth. Not anymore. He looked directly at the monster. "My family died because I chose war over them," he said quietly. "I cannot change that." The creature screamed and rushed toward him like living darkness. "But I will not carry this curse forever." The rider raised his sword one final time. As the first light of dawn appeared above the hills, the blade pierced the creature's chest. A terrible scream exploded across the forest before the faceless rider shattered into thousands of pieces of black ash carried away by the wind. Silence finally returned. The fog disappeared. The dead forest slowly came alive beneath the morning sun. For the first time in many years, the lone rider felt peace. Then, carried softly by the wind, he heard one final voice. His daughter. "Goodbye, father." The rider closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the road stretched endlessly before him beneath the rising sun. He climbed onto his horse and rode away slowly across the golden plains. Still alone, but no longer haunted.